As South Africa goes back to work, the big question is whether the grid can handle the surge.
Well, Eskom has entered 2026 in its strongest position in over 5 years, it says, with a 4,400 megawatt cushion compared to last year. We do have fewer unplanned outages and the energy availability factor even rising.
The focus is shifting now from keeping the lights on to controlling those costs.
All right, so Eric Shunmagum, the Eskom General Manager in the Office of the Group Executive for Generation, joins us to discuss the recovery and the utilities' readiness for the weeks ahead. Eric, thank you so much. Really appreciate it this morning, and I think it's still Happy New Year that we're actually still saying. Quite a few operational changes still at play when it comes to this that have enabled Eskom's recent turnaround in generation capacity. Are you able to walk us through some of those?
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I want to wish you well for 2026. I think it's a great space to be in. Unlike previous interviews with the system unreliable, so a bit more confident. I think what's important is that when we go back and we recover, recap, in the last 32 months, we started the recovery plan. And in this recovery plan, there was a focused attention on recovering plant. We identified 6 plant power stations that contributed close to 70% of the breakdowns. And then we added a further 2. I think importantly, what we've seen over these last 32 months is these stations are now back. More importantly, last year, we had the Kusile 6 unit come back, we had Medupi 4, and we had the Kuberg unit return back from service. This puts us into a very favorable position. And as we've reported, if you really compare last year this time, we were really struggling. We were looking for every megawatt to make up. And so this 4,400 gives us this head start. I think over and above this, what we are seeing is the hard work that we've actually put in the recovery. Our plants now are more reliable, more stable, we're more comfortable, and the hard planned maintenance, the intensive planned maintenance that we had actually put over the last 32 months, we now can get into a more stable environment where we would sort of average our planned maintenance back to international norms, which is around 10% of the fleet. But overall, if you just look at some of the figures, some 32 months ago, when you really look at plant that was in breakdown, there was close to 18,000 megawatts. As I speak to you this morning, we've got plant only, it's 8,000, so there's some 10,000 recovery, which shows, this improvement. The knock-on effect of that has been massive savings on diesel. As diesel usage, as you know, some 2 years ago, we reported spending 33 billion. But as we move into this year, we're projecting to spend just below 8 billion rand.
I mean, those changes are very significant and matter when it comes to the sustainable nature and finances of Eskom. But are the gains when it comes to how much capacity we then have, is that sustainable? Can we keep up this 4,400 generation capacity that is ultimately that buffer that we have right now?
So I think what's important is when you look at the overall country plan, the minister made pronouncements last year in terms of the R8bn 2025. And I think what's important, the generation fleet will play an important role in the short to medium term, specifically in terms of capacity. I think when you really look at importance is the new capacity that needs to come back online, coming from our renewable resources, PV wind, battery. There's some gas that's planned, and then lastly, I think to maintain this into the medium to long term, you're looking at nuclear. So Eskom, I think, plans to aspire towards the 70% EAF. I think with us now hovering around that 70%, what it does mean is that we've got enough capacity to meet the demand. And in fact, going into the summer, as we've reported last year, we are in a much more favorable position.
So is the plan to just keep it at that 70% EAF, energy availability factor?
So I just think in terms of supply and demand, this is what we've compacted to the shareholder. I think it's important. We should stabilize around 70%. There's talk of moving it to around 72%. I think what you will see is as some of the older plant, we start to decommission them in the latter years. This will also contribute positively to the EAF. But at this stage, in terms of our compacting, that's the reference point. It is to aspire to 70%. Having said that, when you really look at the medium-term system outlook, the system is more than adequate at 65%. So what we're saying is there's sufficient capacity at a 65% EAF.
Okay, very interesting that as well. So that 5 percentage point buffer important there. How do you balance, though, the financial recovery with the need for new investments, particularly when it comes to generation capacity and the shifts that then need to be made, whether it's coal fleet reliability, whether it's understanding the demands that are now in place in certain areas and having to shift to all of those. So how do you maintain that?
So I think as we've reported, the focus now in terms of Eskom's strategy, importantly, is to look at more efficiencies within the business. And over the next 3 years, there's plans to reduce costs to the tune of about 50 billion rand. And so, that will come from all the various elements, looking at people, plant, and the processes. But then the big issue is Eskom's plans to transition. You're aware of the green unit that has been set up. And I think Eskom believes in terms of reimagining the future, we have got a role to play. So there's I think it's twofold.
Sure.
One is to look at coal, but look at clean coal. And that's specifically to look at technologies where coal really isn't the problem. It's the emissions and the carbon. So if we can address this through technology solutions, that's pretty much where we are focusing. And through the RP, we've been given the next 3 to 4 years to actually implement some of these new technologies.
Yeah.
So there's some exciting work happening in the division.
Eric, let me interrupt you. Sorry, Eric. I think you piqued my interest twice there. So one, very quickly, on this one, if you're able to give me a short answer on this. So you said a 50 billion rand possible cost reduction. Is that now formally part of Eskom's plans? And by when exactly is Eskom planning to achieve that?
So these are compacted figures over the next 3 years. So by the FY 2029, each division has been given a target to look at areas of efficiency.
Yeah.
And so that will happen over the next 3 years.
Okay, so that's one element. And then the other part is you speak about clean coal. What exactly does that look like?
Okay, so if you really look at the challenges that we have on the Eskom fleet, there's quite a lot of effort going into reducing the emissions coming out of these stacks. And there's various technologies. But when you look at the older stations, the challenge is it's such old technology. Even with the present standard and all the work that we've done, it does not meet the standard. So what we are investigating right now is the CFBC technology. This technology definitely looks, when you really look at the outputs, the emissions are much lower, but what we have to solve for is carbon. So we'll go through a pilots and demo stage where we will test this. I think the challenges that we have is that these will not be done on open, clean fields as green fields. We're going to have to do retrofits into the old stations.
Yeah.
And in the IRP, you'll see that it does cater for us starting these pilots. And if these pilots are seen as successful, then we have huge opportunity to roll out this technology in the older stations.
Yeah, because my question mark here would be that the emissions of coal would still be the same. The harmful nature of it to the earth would still be the same. All of that is still bound to change. It's the generation capacity of coal that you're ultimately changing here. Am I correct?
No, okay. So besides having stable, I think it addresses two issues. One is to try to have base load. But if you really look at the emissions coming out of the stack, okay, there are technologies. This goes into some technical detail, but there are technologies that actually start to filter out these gases. You're looking at SOx and NOx. So the particulates as well, the emissions at the stacks, that's reduced and complies very well with the standards.
Okay.
So there are technologies that you introduce, hence complying to the emissions.
Yeah.
As I say, the challenge would be is then to solve for carbon, and that's a lot of work now that's going into, and I think it's keeping the engineers busy.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because one imagines that that's a heavy deployment of funding as well that may be needed for such technology. And the use cases for it globally would be interesting to unravel and unpack. And hopefully we can have you on a little bit more for that one. But I also wanted to talk about the unbundling of Eskom into those three facets, of course, and how that has been very critical and important to shifting to where we are right now, where we have extra generation capacity, where we have that buffer. Has that been the absolute critical point here? Has that been what has driven this?
Well, I think in terms of Eskom's strategy, it has definitely enabled, it's now, allowed for individuals to think differently. In terms of, we're just not now one big company, you have to fight for your position. So I think the first stage of allowing the previous transmission group, which has now separated, we call it the NTCSA, and then over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see the further separation of an independent system operator. That will definitely create opportunity for all role players in this market. For generation, once again, it allows for competition, it allows for new entrants, and it allows then for generation to compete fairly. I think on the distribution business, equally the same will happen. I think in terms of the journey, we would have liked things to have happened much faster. Unfortunately, through some of the processes, it's taken a bit longer, but it's definitely played a role in a response to your question.
Yeah. Just very quickly, the generation recovery plan needed that 254 billion rand debt relief package, and there was some success based off of that. Are there safeguards in place to ensure that similar interventions are then not needed to ensure that something like this gets off the ground or happens in future?
So I think what's important is that the debt relief, was specifically to address the balance sheet, which was good. It then allowed for us to ensure that the funding we normally get through our NERSA and the tariff, to allow for the funding. What was important, it was a critical enabler for us to actually do the maintenance. We even went ahead, when you really look at the generation plant, we planned 2 years ahead. It allowed for us to actually purchase our long lead items. It allowed us to put in our contracts. So definitely in terms of giving space for the other revenue sources to ensure that Eskom has the funding and specific focus on the generation recovery plan. Yes, I think funding played a very important role. Then over and above that, I think when you really look at this recovery, it's been a collective with government, and the Energy Action Plan. We had then the appointment of the minister, very, very positive leadership. We then had the appointment of the new board, and then the appointment of leadership. So I think, this played a critical role. We've seen a change in leadership, playing an important role. The focus was on putting the right people in the right places. And then the other two elements was enabling the processes. Some of the processes were very lethargic. We had to go through, because we are a state-owned enterprise.
Yeah.
But importantly, through the Energy Action Plan and through the leadership of the president, some of these processes were streamlined, and that helped tremendously. And linked to people, I think we saw also a cultural shift. I think that was important.
Okay.
And then when it came to the easy part was identifying the plant. Plant, you find the problems, and so there was very focused and a deliberate project set up a recovery office. We reported religiously at the highest level in the organization, and through that we've recovered close to about 8 gigawatts just in terms of recovery.
Very important numbers actually there when one considers. And I think that cultural shift is one that a lot of people will be asking and saying, well, maybe that's the sustainability factor here as well.